Hi, everyone. Today we're here to talk about extended learning opportunities. My name is Dawn Breault, and I work at Hollis Brookline High School, and I oversee the ELO program here. And I also serve on the leadership team for the New Hampshire ELO Network. So our first slide, thinking about the big picture of today's chat, ELOs are for all students, and all means all. So no matter what the student's skill level is or where they're at, ELOs could potentially be an option for kiddos. Please be mindful when you're thinking about ELOs that not every school has a point person for ELOs. There might be somebody who kind of would handle the question, but every school is going to be implementing them a little bit differently. And also be mindful that the way it looks might be different school to school. So back to what I just said about the implementation, because of local control, schools can kind of offer it the way that works for them. But the bottom line is they should have a way to make them happen if requested. So the next slide, this is kind of what are ELOs according to the law, if you will. What does DOE say? The bottom line is they can happen anytime, any place, at any pace, and any method. Please feel free to click on that link when you have a moment, and you can kind of read for yourself the actual verbiage. But the bottom line is ELOs can look like maybe an independent study or private instruction, maybe performing groups, internships, community service, apprenticeships. There's some debate around online courses if they're considered an ELO, but anything that happens outside of the traditional classroom would be considered kind of an ELO. So the next slide, there's some components that need to be involved when talking about an ELO. So oftentimes many school districts, most of the ELOs that happen, and again, this is just from my experience and what I've seen, tend to be more kind of like an internship. Some schools are doing ELOs for credit-bearing core courses, but oftentimes they're around career exploration. So keeping in mind when you're thinking about a high quality ELO, they're credit bearing. So it's not just something to do for fun. This ends up on the transcript, you're earning credit, and they're based on competencies. There's always a partner, a community partner, multiple partners, but in particular, somebody from the outside. It could be in the school building as well, but typically in the outside. There's a communication plan, who's doing what. There's always an essential question, kind of an I wonder question. If you're looking at the slide right here, there's a picture of a young girl helping a dog. It looks like maybe her essential question is, I wonder what it would take to become a veterinarian and have to do surgery on dogs. Or I wonder a million different things. So anything, whatever that question is that kiddo has is part of the ELO. Then there's rigorous learning components. So what is the student going to learn? How is that going to happen? And then the assessment plan. Once that learning has happened, how do we assess whether or not that learning actually occurred? So these are the elements that kind of come into play when considering the ELO to be high quality. And the next slide, if we're thinking about all means all and all students, right? If you have a student who maybe is not earning traditional high school credit and maybe working towards a certificate of completion, sometimes it's called, or a skills diploma, if they're not earning credit, they could absolutely still be doing an ELO. And thinking about it more like a work experience, thinking things like work tolerance, work capacity, how long can somebody sit and stand? Can they lift a box at a certain weight? What can they do well? What do they need to work on? Social skill and soft skill development. The ELO can serve as transition assessment. So in the world of secondary transition, age-appropriate transition assessment is something that has to be done. This can serve as a form of informal transition assessment. And then also vocational preferences. So if you have a kiddo who's doing an ELO to learn more about a specific job, we're able to kind of pinpoint likes and dislikes. And the next slide talks about roles and responsibilities. So typically, again, district by district, you'll see an ELO coordinator, and that's the person who kind of puts together all the different aspects of the ELO, working with the Department of Labor, making sure the site is safe for the student, serves as kind of the key communicator with all parties. If the building has a transition coordinator, that person would work hand in hand with the ELO coordinator, thinking about and, you know, kind of working through if there needs to be accommodations or any job coaching, transportation considerations. The case manager or the mentor teacher work with the student and ELO coordinator on identifying those competencies and assessing the learning. And the next slide shows you what the community partner, so they're the ones that have the expertise. So for example, that picture we saw of the young girl working on the dog, here at my high school, we don't have a program where we can teach somebody about how to help dogs. So that community partner, they're the ones that have that expertise. Obviously, you need a student to do an ELO. They have to have an interest or a passion and a desire to explore learning. So thinking of an ELO as kind of over and above, the student has to be kind of really engaged to make this happen and want to do it. And of course, we need permission. So parent, guardian permission, they have to kind of sign off and agree that this can happen and, you know, be a part of that whole process from beginning to end to make sure this makes sense for their kiddo. The next slide is a sample ELO agreement. So this was for a student who was on a life skills diploma and wanted to learn a little bit more about outdoor maintenance. So things like, you know, think about a typical high school, there's football fields and soccer fields and shrubbery and flowers. And this kiddo was really interested in learning what does it take to maintain acres and acres of property. So we developed a plan. He was going to be working with our facilities manager and assisting them to learn how to do things like weeding and raking. And regarding equipment, we had to get very specific here around supervision, especially if the equipment could potentially be harmful. So we wanted to make sure we could put it in verbiage about that. On the next page, we talk about what he's going to be responsible for. He was going to be learning about the work through kind of what we call field research or observation by kind of doing it real time. He would be reflecting upon the work by meeting with myself at the time and a couple of other folks on his team talking about how it's going. And at the end, he was going to kind of share out what he learned. So this is kind of how the ELO was described in the agreement. So everybody was on the same page. And the next one, with regard to a description as to what, so that was how it was going to be done. This is what's going to be learned. So for this kid, he needed to work on things like following directions, task initiation, communication, and asking for clarification when confused. It was for this student because, again, he was a life skills kid and did not need the credit at the time. No credit was awarded, and it was a means of working toward his IEP goals. So that's how we kind of spelled out that plan. Now, plans can look different depending upon what's being learned, what the student is learning, and how it's being assessed. This is just a sample of what one might look like for a life skills student. And that's kind of a basic overview of ELOs. Keep in mind that ELOs are a powerful tool, not only for students, but for school counselors, for any education team member to be cognizant of. They can really help a student become engaged with what's happening around them, explore their world, all while earning credit. I've seen ELOs be really beneficial to lots of different students, and I think any team would be remiss not to at least explore them as an option.